most people aren't sifting through the nuances of language in terms of service agreement. I think the best professionals, the best leaders are aware of the noise, but aren't moved by it.
On this episode of To The Point, we talked to my old friend, Charles Pierre. Since graduating from DePaul University, Charles has gone to law school, he's worked at Meta, and now he's lead counsel for data privacy and cybersecurity at TikTok. And we talk about a lot of different things, including those long terms and conditions. How do the teams that are actually crafting those think about those complex documents that have really wide-reaching implications? We also talk about the problem that many young people are experiencing right now with both loneliness and a lack of mentoring. Charles, in all his free time, being sarcastic there, is also working to tackle that with a new initiative and company he has called Alfalfa House. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did having it. Now, let's get to the point. And Charles, it's good to have you. First off, we need the disclosure that we are friends, went to DePaul University.
Yep.
Tigers.
We go way back.
We've both bounced around since.
Yeah.
For obviously people who don't know you, what are you doing now? And then how did you kind of end up there? What were the stops along the way?
So I'm senior privacy counsel at TikTok. I oversee a number of global matters related to data privacy due diligence, product counseling, essentially building products and advising teams on building products with privacy by design principles. That's the notion that you have to have privacy at the forefront of how you build products, how you launch products, and how you communicate about products. And so I do that work, but this is a continuation of work I've done throughout my career. I graduated from, Howard Law School in 2016 and moved to the government for a year where I was a law clerk for the chief judge of the Court of Appeals in DC, and then moved on to different law firms where I advised companies on regulatory issues, complex litigation, corporate finance, debt structuring work, as well as a lot of cybersecurity and data privacy work. Then I went to Facebook, now Meta, where I continued that work as lead counsel for privacy, and had a brief stint at Bolt Financial, a fintech startup, where I was head of privacy and head of compliance. But ultimately, I knew that I wanted to be in a tech environment, one that has at its core a larger viewership, which means larger abilities for impact. Yeah.
I mean, TikTok's kind of there when you think about, if not the most used app in America, maybe the world right now, in terms of how people are spending their minutes on their phone.
Yeah.
What is the conversation like, or is there a responsibility internally when you're kind of like, what the language we put in that upfront user agreement, or how we, think about privacy? This one line or this one document has huge implications globally. Do you feel like, is that weighty?
It's not, because I think that if you rely on your terms of service or your privacy policy to be the end-all be-all with how you communicate your data privacy practices, then you're probably not doing the best job you possibly could do. I mean, let's be completely candid. Most people aren't sifting through the nuances of language in terms of service agreement. Think of it as a contract between the platform and its users.
Sure.
So it outlines a lot of things related to how they should experience the app and sort of how the company should treat their data. But the point I'm making is it has to be at a certain reading level. So I was involved with the Privacy Center revamp at Meta, and they sought to bring the reading comprehension from an 11th grade reading level to a 7th grade reading level. That's like a big deal because there was huge friction with many communities not understanding what it was that the privacy policy was saying. But if you try to distill it and sort of make it too elementary, you miss the point. You can't really explain things appropriately.
Right.
So there's a balancing act that has to be done, but that's why they have smart people working on these things. So,
I think when we see the congressional hearings, when Mark Zuckerberg goes before Congress and he gets the question from an elderly member of Congress, and they say, Mr. Zuckerberg, I was talking about chocolate with my wife the other day. You know what you're going to talk about? And then chocolate popped up on my phone. How does that happen? Was my phone listening to me?
Yeah.
I think people as a whole have a pretty rudimentary or elementary understanding of what they're signing up for, right? The fact that when a murder is solved, it's because police got data from certain apps that you agreed to allow your tracking to. And, the local police department saw that you were at the crime scene, at that time. It's one of those things where people don't realize, like, yes, we agree to for the ease of, knowing what our commute is, right? Or being able to say, hey, Alexa, we do give up a lot of privacy. But then I feel like we live in these extremes. People in America who don't care at all, and then people in America who try and live completely off the grid. Is there any way to straddle the middle ground?
I don't know, but I do know that if we take a step back, we can understand that the deal often does work in our favor as a consuming public. It's absolutely true that there are far reaches of our information on the part of these social media companies, big tech firms that seek to mine data for nefarious reasons. That's true, and I'm sure all the good companies are doing something about that. But on the other hand, in order to live in an orderly society, we've all somewhat agreed to the social contract that says, yes, if there's a crime that could be solved by pinging a cell phone tower and seeing or sort of observing a cell phone tower and seeing which cell phones were pinged when, and that can place a murderer at A, B, or C location. Yes, I have no problem with even my location being pinged to various towers that exist in a city because I want murders to be solved where I live. And I think that give and take is appropriate in this one extreme example of murder.
Sure.
But obviously, with regards to monitoring unnecessarily, we should all be offended by that and take great issue with it. I think one thing these congressional hearings you're talking about didn't do a great job of is getting into the weeds of what that really means. What does it mean to monitor? Is it simply to know that you've visited one website or another? Is it to constantly observe, create profiles of, and be able to then share those profiles with advertisers? Mm-hmm. Is that unnecessary? Is that sort of nefarious? And it's up for the consuming public to make a choice. I think a lot of times we don't talk about agency enough. We have a choice with what platforms we use, but it's honestly first incumbent on the companies to make it so that their policies are fair, mm-hmm. that the give and take is equal, that the consuming public is getting a lot for what they give, and that they're on notice. And I think that TikTok and other companies are doing a much better job of placing consumers on notice. And this is all without a federal law that sort of mandates how to do that.
Right. I want to ask you briefly, and obviously you're not speaking on behalf of TikTok, but I'm curious, so many people have just seen how much TikTok's been in the news. What was it like working there? Can you share kind of from your experience?
Yeah.
Was it weird seeing your employer in the headlines every other day?
It might have been, but for the fact that I worked at Meta for a few years and I got kind of used to opening up the Wall Street Journal every morning and seeing a huge article about some practice that was or was not great. I think the best professionals, the best leaders are aware of the noise, but aren't moved by it. And so while I was absolutely aware that there was a looming ban, I didn't let it impact the level of dedication that I brought to each project or the level of legal acumen I deployed for answering questions. I treated it like any other day just because my work doesn't stop just because there's some huge glaring issue in the news. Was it distracting? I mean, at times it was, but by and large, it didn't really move me.
Yeah.
I was aware of it, but it didn't move me.
I mean, how could it not be a little distracting?
Sure.
The week of, right, when there was the actual inflection points around it's been taken off of an app store, end of the Biden administration, beginning of the Trump administration.
Sure.
I mean, that was a moment in time in terms of a social media company experiencing different levers being pulled that we'll probably not see again.
I mean, I hope we don't.
Yeah. At least you don't want to be, in the
I hope
middle
we
of
don't.
it. Yeah.
I think that, I don't know if this is scientifically true, but I feel like I've heard this somewhere that the center of a tornado is calm and outside of that center is chaotic. And so my colleagues, we were pretty level set, focused on what our objectives were, which was to continue delivering a great product for a bunch of users who really care about the platform. And we let the other folks working on those other issues do that.
Outside of TikTok, one of the phenomenons we've talked about on this podcast, and we at Pinkston as a communications firm often experience, is kind of the natural tension that arises between communications staffers and legal. And especially whenever you're going through a crisis or a situation that involves both organizations, comms folks generally say, we need to get out ahead of this. We need to over communicate, respond.
Sure.
And a lot of times legal, it seems, this is from my obviously biased comms perspective, is more, we'll say, reticent and wants to say, hey, there's more potential downside than there is upside to talking about this. So stay quiet and don't, open ourselves up to unnecessary risk. How do you think about that as somebody who I know is a great communicator, but also a lawyer by trade?
I have loved working with comms professionals who are, yes, maybe overly ambitious or want to get ahead of a story by putting some disclosure out there. But we have different roles at different times with a shared mission. The shared mission is let's protect the company that we work for and mitigate risk. The goals might be pursued through different means by the example you gave, the comms professional maybe wanting to put a disclosure out, a press release.
Well, that's funny because you just said the goals, the shared goals are protect the company and mitigate risk.
Yeah.
But those are like very legal terms. So the communications professionals might say, sure, it's mitigate risk and protect the company, but it's also communicate with our customers, our shareholders, whatever it is, in a way that projects transparency and confidence.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, but every now and then they're
I'll tell you why it's the same
at
thing.
odds.
Think about this from just a purely capitalistic perspective. Any big company wants a bunch of users to either buy their widgets or be on their platforms.
Sure.
The more you can mitigate risk and detract regulators from coming up and knocking on your door to say, what are you doing for this or that practice? The more you can serve your customers. And so if mitigation of risk is one of the sort of larger goals you have as a legal organization, that allows for you to give your services to your customers and to deploy them however you'd like. So I think that I really do see them as one and the same. How do you, I think you say, communicate with your customers in a way that puts them on notice. That's mitigating risk. If you communicate with your customers and they don't know what the hell you're talking about, that's a very risky thing to do. It doesn't make any business or legal sense. So if the lawyer in this room that we're creating is working with a comms professional, the lawyer has a fiduciary duty to the company to draft whatever disclosure in the clearest possible way. And that's aligned with the comms professional. The way they do it might be different, but they have the exact same goals.
Right. And when you launch it and where it's disseminated, like all these things matter.
100%. Like what will have the greatest reach and all those kinds of things.
Sure.
So there can be friction, but it should only be professional friction, not goals. We're not really disagreeing on what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
We're trying to put out the best possible product with the greatest impact. And in so doing, we mitigate risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that you are passionate about, in addition to pickup basketball, is
very passionate about pickup basketball.
Is mentoring.
Yeah.
And I know you do a lot of that yourself, and I want to talk about how you're doing that. But I want to get to why you're so passionate about mentoring and who in your life has been a seminal mentor.
So first and foremost, my father's been a huge inspiration, mentor, and example for me. But I didn't necessarily understand all of his teachings throughout my teens and 20s because I kind of put my dad on a pedestal. He went to law school after having already been a doctor because he was intellectually bored. I mean, he's like one of those guys who's just academically truly impressive. My mom, my sister, my dad, they all graduated valedictorian high school. Obviously, I did not.
Yeah.
I did all right, but I didn't graduate valedictorian. So I come from one of those families, so I didn't look to them initially as examples that were tangible and real for me. So in the process of looking for my why during college, I read a book called Vernon Can Read, written by Vernon Jordan, civil rights activist, business titan, huge figure here in DC. And
in DePaul grad.
And in DePaul grad, exactly. And I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do this, but I just reached out to his secretary and asked to meet him. And initially they were like, no.
He's busy meeting with
presidents
heads of state.
Yeah. I mean, he's exactly like on the number of corporate boards, like American Express, Callaway Golf, Revlon, Dow Jones, a bunch. Honorary degrees from like 100 universities. He's the man.
Yeah.
advisor to presidents, from every president from Lyndon Johnson to Barack Obama. I just reached out to him consistently enough that his secretary was like, listen, if you put your request in writing, I'll send it to him, but stop calling.
Yeah.
And I wrote him a letter. He replied, invited me to meet him. And that began, a 12-year-long relationship where—
And had you ever done that with another person before? This wasn't like your—
I had.
Okay.
So in high school, we were pretty damn good, but we got no media coverage. And so I wrote to a number of different publications as captain of our track team to say, you should look at us and write about us.
But this was a, you should write about our track team,
Yeah.
not you should I want to meet you and you should be my
This is
mentor.
my first time.
This is
Yeah.
your first time.
Yeah.
And you just shot your shot with Vernon
Shot my shot
Jordan.
with Vernon Jordan, yeah. And again, I read his book. It was a New York Times bestseller, closed the last page, and made it my business to know him and to learn from him. And I got lucky. I made myself an attractive mentee by not just saying that I wanted to be mentored by him, but also offering something to him.
What'd you offer him?
I offered him a seat at my advisory table. I said, I'm running for president of the student body, and if I win, I'd like to have you as a presidential advisor.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I have the letters.
That's fantastic.
He laughed at that.
Um,
I'm like, you advise presidents. I'll be a president. So advise me.
Advise me.
He actually did, by the way.
I'm sure he did.
He really did. Yeah.
You know what I found, and I think you know this to be true, but there's so many stories on Twitter, and I've seen this play out in my own life as well. But when you reach out to somebody, no matter their level of success, there is a, call it, base form of being flattered or just a desire. People love being asked for advice because what it signals to them, it invites them to share. And we all have a story to share about our experience and pass on that wisdom. And it doesn't matter. In fact, maybe the higher you get, the less you get asked that question because you are in this rare air.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. And I guess now in hindsight, being where you're at now, it makes sense why he would say yes.
I think it does. And what I try to explain to young professionals is people seek to mentor those who they see something in.
Sure.
Not just that which reminds them of themselves, but a glaring light that, but for their mentorship, might not shine as bright as it possibly can. And make it your business to position yourself as somebody who is going to do well in life, but with their help will do even better. And that might be because of a book recommendation. It might be because of a learning or sort of a weekly chat. It doesn't need to be like a formal relationship. Like mentorship is something that builds upon itself. So, Vernon was not my mentor the first, after our first meeting.
Right.
It took years for that to really be the case, but I offered something. And, we're joking about what I offered actually, but I offered him insight into what it was like being a young Black person on campus that he so loved, but that he had grown to sort of be disconnected to over the last, I think, 10 or 15 years. He hadn't visited DePaul in about 15 or so years before he came my senior year 4 times. And there wasn't a mistake about that. He came because he liked what he saw with not just my progress, but the progress I was explaining to him many others were making. And so I didn't realize I was offering him insight in a window into DePaul and the experience that young people are facing, but I did, and that was really valuable for him. And I sort of had to restructure what it was that was valuable that I was offering after I left DePaul. And I went to Howard, his alma mater, but it sort of morphed and it changed into other things.
I think one of the things too is you didn't start with this ask of.
Yeah.
I think maybe a mistake mentees can make when planting the seed or throwing out the
$1,000,000,000%
bait is you don't say, I want to come shadow you for a week. That's not going to happen. He's in too many important meetings. You've made the barrier to entry too high. Start small with a letter and maybe a small ask, which is like, I would love to, when I'm in DC, grab a coffee at a place of your choosing, right? Give me 30 minutes.
Yeah, or even less. But I totally agree that you have to sort of think about it incrementally and not try to, boil the ocean all at once.
Sure.
I forget where I read this, but you don't ask someone to be your wife the first time you meet them. You have to sort of, I've never asked anyone to be my wife. You have, so you can tell me.
To prove it,
Yeah. It's a sort of chronological, incremental process.
Yeah, there's a courting process.
So One thing I tell people, and again, at Alfalfa House, we've hosted all these events across DC at different venues that bring together young professionals to learn from our industry leaders who serve as mentors on these panels. But one thing I try to tell young professionals is your first cold email to somebody like a Zach or whoever, the person who you're sending the email to should be able to reply using one hand as they're walking from one meeting to another in their office. Whether that's a book recommendation, hey, I saw Zach on a podcast, or I saw Zach on some panel. He offered really great insight. I like him. I want to know him. I've got a long-term plan of how I'm going to figure that out, but I want to make contact with him. So I wrote him an email. I asked for follow-up on a particular point he made or a book recommendation, and I leave it at that. He offers, a yes or a no, and he gives me that book recommendation. I wait. Then a few months later, you follow up after having read that book, presumably, deriving certain insights from it, and then maybe sharing an example of how you've deployed what you learned in your real life.
That's right.
That then tells the person receiving the email, the Zach in this case, to say, hey, first of all, this person's like taking tangible steps based off of advice I gave. That feels good. And they're deriving value from that immediately. That feels good. Your entry point is much more sort of broad once you do something like that rather than, can you be my mentor right when you meet somebody?
So let's talk about Alfalfa House a little bit, because this is kind of a side business that you've been running, but now it's off the runway. What is Alfalfa House to both the mentors and the mentees, and how'd you come up with it?
Yeah, so Alfalfa House is a platform that will bring together recent college grads, young professionals to, one, live together, to be mentored by an industry professional in their area of focus, and three, have social programming around really cool events that bring together other like-minded individuals. And what we sought to do with Alfalfa House was address the huge issue that's going on with Gen Z, which is the impacts of loneliness. The Surgeon General in 2023 published this really detailed report about the impacts of loneliness, how isolation is more destructive to the human body than smoking 15 packs of cigarettes a day, how every disease is impacted and sort of more rampant if one is isolated and lonely. And it's not getting any better. Obviously, these social media platforms and online publications are sort of vying for our attention. They're creating greater and greater silos amongst our young population. But the net impact of that is a more isolated demographic who don't feel motivated, who don't feel confident as they enter their careers, and who ultimately are less healthy. And so Alfalfa House is, yes, a house that brings together like-minded, smart, thoughtful people, but it's deeper than that. It's a mission that once we amplify it and sort of scale, will be a huge community of thoughtful, smart young people who engage each other, who energize each other, and who build upon each other.
And right now, I mean, when you think about the landscape that exists, most young people have that on college and maybe through occasional alumni networking events and whatnot. But there really isn't this in our society, a conscious effort to surround yourself with, iron sharpens iron is the old phrase, but it's one of those things where this doesn't exist. Most people have a hard time, if they want it, seeking it out and finding an infrastructure.
Going back to the noise, I mean, there are so many competing venues vying for their attention. We don't have one centralized place that functions as a public forum that used to exist back in ancient Greece, where governments would create these spaces for people to exchange ideas and to have community. And instead, we have really busy work lives. We have less than enthusiastic social lives, and we have more isolation than ever, which creates a really depressed populace. And over time, we're going to see the effects amplify for the worse. And so what we're trying to do is address that fact by not speaking about this in grim terms only, but highlighting the fact that, yes, when you bring together those smart, thoughtful people who previously might have been a bit more isolated than we'd like, they become amplified faster, they accelerate in their careers more thoughtfully, and they achieve their dreams in a much more specific and targeted way.
So what's the goal? In 10 years, cast the vision for me of there's an Alfalfa House in every major city. What are you thinking?
Yeah, there's an Alfalfa House in every major city. And there's a web platform. That's not 10 years away. That's probably 1 year away or less. We're building a web app that's going to allow for virtual memberships to essentially be what LinkedIn should have been for young professionals. What we're trying to do is, on one end, create a template for people to reach out to folks for cold emails. Through AI, we're going to leverage a bunch of different APIs from LinkedIn and all over the internet to make their course easier to career success. So our cheesy tagline is "Your success accelerated," but I mean that and I believe it. We want to help people get to from point A to point B faster.
So I ask a couple questions on every single To The Point episode. I mean, a little close to home with your background at obviously TikTok and Meta, but if you could send a push alert to every American, what would it be?
I wouldn't, because
no. Yeah. Do I have the consent to send the push alert?
Yeah.
No. Assuming you do, I mean, like a news alert, right? So you get, we'll call it 2 sentences, and the push alert says, "Hey, Americans, : what's your message?"
Challenge yourself today and reach out to someone who you do not agree with on the political spectrum, and promise me, whoever is sending this,
God, yeah,
I'm not God, but
I'm joking because it's coming from, it's just a random push alert.
And commit to having at least a 30-minute conversation with someone you don't agree with. I think that if we do more of that, then the benefits societally will be so far-reaching that we won't really recognize the country and its polarization in 5 years. But that's me waving a magic wand, asking for people to reach across different cultural aisles, and that might not happen. But if I had it my way, it would.
Charles, I think that's all, man. I think that's all I got. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Well, thank you for having me. And I have to say that on the record, that it's awesome seeing how much you've grown. Not to say that you were some schmuck before, but
maybe I was.
Well, I won't say yes or no.
We'll leave the Facebook photos buried from college.
I printed them off. So
okay, there you go.
But it's awesome to see your growth. It's awesome to see the dedication with which you do your job and how you really strive to enact as much good in the world. And I hope everyone watching is inspired by it, because I am.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Man. Not to say I knew you when, but I knew you when, and I still proud to know you now. And
appreciate that.
Obviously, people can go follow, find you on social media, find Alfalfa House on social media.
Yeah.
We'll look for the website and the app here in the coming months.
For sure. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, brother, man.
Thank you.
If you like the episode, like, follow, subscribe, share, give it 5 stars, all that good stuff. Now, I'll get to the point and let you get back to your day. We'll see you next episode.